The jumbo jet shudders violently at 30,000 feet as it hits a sudden pocket of chaos. Passengers scream as overhead bins pop open and alarms blare in the cockpit. Oxygen masks drop from the ceiling, swinging wildly amid the turbulence. The aircraft is being tossed around like a toy in a storm. First Officer Ethan Hayes' heart pounds. One moment, he was reviewing the flight path. Then the turbulence struck like a freight train. He looks to his right. Captain Morgan is slumped over the controls, eyes closed and face ashen. "Captain!" Ethan yells. But there is no response. The awful truth hits him like ice. The captain is out cold. There are 176 souls on board, and now Ethan is the only one left to save them. For an instant, terror and self-doubt grip Ethan. He's trained for emergencies, but not this. A bucking plane, failing instruments, and no captain to back him up, all while he has only one good arm. Another violent jolt nearly wrenches the yoke from his grasp. The navigation screen flickers and goes dark, and the autopilot disengages with a shrill chime. Gritting his teeth, Ethan tightens both hands on the control yoke to steady the aircraft. His right hand slick with sweat on one side, and on the other, his prosthetic left hand coming to life. Ethan clamps the mechanical fingers of his prosthetic arm around the shaking yoke. The metal digits lock with a soft whir as firm as any flesh and bone grip. He takes a split second to close his eyes and summon every ounce of focus. When they snap open, fear remains, but now it burns beneath a fierce resolve. With the captain unconscious and nearly 200 passengers depending on him, Ethan refuses to let this plane drop from the sky. Alarms scream and wind howls, but he steels himself for the fight of his life. It's time to attempt the impossible. He is all that stands between his passengers and disaster, and he will not let them down. If you believe in miracles unfolding at 30,000 feet, then brace yourself and join us on this journey. Just hours before the chaos, Ethan Hayes was merely another pilot walking through Denver International Airport. He boarded Flight 219 as the quietly determined first officer, running his pre-flight checks diligently. As he strode around the jet on the tarmac, he briefly brushed his prosthetic left hand against the plane's metal skin, a ritual acknowledgement of how far he'd come. Then he pushed aside any lingering doubts and focused on what he loved most: flying. Not long ago, Ethan's future seemed limitless. He had dreamed of being a pilot since childhood, and he earned a coveted appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy. By his junior year, Cadet Hayes was top of his class, a natural flyer with steady hands and steely nerves. Instructors praised him, and even the Academy's commanding officer took note of his potential. Ethan was on the fast track to flying elite fighter jets. But fate intervened cruelly. One clear autumn morning during a routine training flight, the engine of Ethan's jet malfunctioned without warning. Ethan and his instructor ejected as the aircraft plummeted. The parachutes saved their lives, but debris in the violent ejection gravely injured Ethan's left arm. Doctors did all they could, but they had to amputate the arm just below his shoulder. Ethan awoke in a hospital to the devastating news. His arm was gone, and with it, his lifelong dream of becoming an Air Force pilot seemed to vanish. Recovery was grueling. The physical pain was intense, but worse was the heartache of watching his dreams slip away. While his fellow cadets graduated and earned their wings, Ethan received an honorable medical discharge. He remembered leaving the academy at sunset in a quiet, somber farewell. The commandant's parting words were kind, but as Ethan walked away with his empty uniform sleeve fluttering at his side, he felt his world had moved on without him. Yet Ethan refused to let that be the end of his story. Months of rehabilitation followed, during which he pushed himself harder than ever. Fitted with a state-of-the-art prosthetic arm, he relearned how to do everything, from buttoning a shirt to flying an aircraft. He trained relentlessly, first in flight simulators and then in real small planes, until, against all odds, he earned his civilian pilot's license. A regional airline saw his skill and offered him a job as a co-pilot. It wasn't the fighter cockpit he'd dreamed of, but he was back in the sky and grateful for a second chance. Still, many people could only see what he lacked, not what he could do. Passengers would sometimes stare at his prosthetic arm when they spotted it, and occasionally he overheard whispers, "Is it safe for him to fly the plane?" A few colleagues privately wondered if Ethan could handle a real emergency. Every look of doubt was like a small cut, but Ethan met them with a polite smile and flawless performance. He was determined to prove, through action, not words, that a pilot with one arm could be just as capable as any other. If you were boarding a flight and noticed one of your pilots had a prosthetic arm, would you feel safe flying with them? Flight 219's departure from Denver was perfectly routine. As the Boeing 737 took off and climbed to cruising altitude, Ethan and Captain Morgan settled in for what they expected to be an ordinary trip west. Captain Morgan, a seasoned veteran, treated Ethan with professional respect. The skies ahead were a little cloudy, but nothing unusual. In the cockpit, Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. Life might not have turned out exactly as he planned, but he was exactly where he wanted to be, at the controls of an airplane, flying. But over the Rocky Mountains, destiny decided to test Ethan in ways he never anticipated. A warning light blinked to life on the overhead panel, and the plane began to shudder with turbulence. Ethan frowned and tapped the navigation screen as it froze, while the radio began to hiss with static. Captain Morgan shot him a concerned look and asked for a weather update. Scanning the radar, Ethan spotted a blotch of red ahead, a serious thunderstorm looming. They had navigated rough weather before. Together, they prepared to adjust course slightly to avoid the worst of it. Ethan didn't know it yet, but they were flying straight into the fiercest trial of his life. One moment the flight was smooth, and the next it was pure chaos. A violent jolt slammed the aircraft, hurling unsecured items about and drawing screams from the cabin as the plane lurched downward. "What the?" Captain Morgan began to exclaim, but he never finished his sentence. A second, more brutal jolt threw everyone against their restraints. Ethan heard the captain gasp in pain. He glanced over just in time to see Captain Morgan clutch at his chest, eyes wide with shock. "Captain!" Ethan shouted, reaching out. In that instant, the older man's arms went limp and he collapsed forward onto the controls, unconscious. Ethan's stomach plunged. In the blink of an eye, his worst-case scenario had become reality. The pilot in command was down, the aircraft was plummeting through a storm, and 176 passengers were looking to Ethan, the one-armed co-pilot, as their only hope. The ultimate test of his courage and skill had just begun. Ethan yanked the control yoke back with all his strength, fighting to pull the nose of the plummeting jet up. The Boeing 737 was still shuddering and dipping wildly, but he felt a slight response, the nose beginning to rise out of its dive. At the same time, He pressed his radio transmit button, forcing calm into his voice. "Mayday, Mayday, this is West Air 219. Captain is incapacitated. I need assistance." For a few seconds, only static hissed back. Lightning flashed outside as the altimeter spun dangerously low. They were still losing altitude far too fast. Ethan couldn't wait any longer for a reply. With his prosthetic hand, he reached over and eased the throttle back to stop the plane's rapid descent, while his right hand kept a white-knuckle grip on the yoke. The engine's thunder waned slightly as the aircraft began leveling off, still unsteady, but no longer in free fall. Captain Morgan remained motionless, slumped in his seat, so Ethan took command. He flipped the switch for the cabin intercom. In a firm, clear voice, he announced, "This is First Officer Hayes. Our captain is ill, and I am now in control. We will be making an emergency landing. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin and secure yourselves. If there is a doctor on board, please attend to the captain immediately." In the cabin, lead flight attendant Maria fought down her own panic and rushed forward. She burst into the cockpit to find chaos, alarms blaring, rain slashing the windshield, the captain unconscious, and Ethan wrestling with the controls. A passenger, who was a retired nurse, squeezed in behind her. Together, Maria and the nurse gently pulled Captain Morgan out of his seat and laid him on the floor. "He's barely got a pulse," the nurse shouted over the noise, checking the captain's vitals. Ethan's eyes never left the controls. Jaw tight, he said loudly, "Do what you can for him. I'll get us on the ground as fast as possible." At last, a voice crackled through the static on the radio. "West Air 219, this is Air Traffic Control. Roger your mayday. Say intentions." Relief washed over Ethan for an instant. "A TC 219 here. Captain down. Plane's instruments failing. Request vectors to nearest runway. I have 176 souls on board," he responded, keeping it brief. The controller began directing him toward a regional airport still miles away. But moments later, another voice interrupted. Calm and authoritative, "West Air 219, McIntyre Air Force Base is nearby. We have you on radar and you're clear to land here. Our runway is closer and we're ready for you." Ethan's heart leapt at the offer. A military base? He hadn't expected that lifeline. "McIntyre, this is 219. Thank you. Diverting to your field now," he replied gratefully. "We also have a medical emergency on board. Please have ambulances ready." The Air Force controller's baritone voice was steady as a rock. "Copy that. 219, runway 31 is clear. Just follow our guidance. We'll get you home safe." For the first time, a spark of hope lit inside Ethan. He turned the aircraft toward the new heading the military controller provided. Through breaks in the clouds, he finally glimpsed a faint glow of lights on the horizon. The base. It was still far, but at least he had a target now. Lightning lit up the sky as he began a cautious descent. The storm raged on without mercy. Turbulence battered the 737 and rain hammered the windshield. Every muscle in Ethan's body ached from tension, but he held on. Fly the plane, find the runway. That mantra beat in his head in time with his thudding heart. The hardest part was still ahead. "West Air 219, you are on course." The Air Force controller's voice guided him. "Descend to 3,000 feet. You're lined up with the runway, 3 miles out." The base had him on radar, but Ethan had to manage the landing practically on his own. He lowered the flaps and landing gear, hands moving in careful coordination between the controls. The instruments were unreliable, But he trusted his training, and the distant red and white lights now coming into view ahead. Suddenly, the plane broke through the lowest clouds. "There!" Maria gasped from behind, spotting the airfield. Straight ahead, cutting through the darkness and pouring rain, was a pair of steady, glowing lines. The approach lights of runway 31. They were on target. Ethan's eyes locked on those lights. Only a couple of minutes of flight remained. If you're on the edge of your seat praying for Ethan to get this plane safely on the ground, you're not alone. Show your support for his unwavering courage. But the storm hadn't finished with them yet. Just as Ethan aligned the jet on final approach, a savage crosswind slammed into the plane. The 737 lurched sideways and dipped, nearly veering off course. Warning sirens blared as the aircraft threatened to stall out of the sky in those final moments. Every muscle in Ethan's body seized with effort as he fought the controls. He pushed the nose down to gain speed and adjusted the throttles in a split-second move, his prosthetic hand and his right hand working in unison. "Come on, hold together," he growled under his breath. The plane responded, slowly, then all at once. The wings leveled and the nose steadied. They were back on the glide path, the runway directly ahead now. Ethan had only one chance to land this jet safely. There would be no second try. The runway lights were rushing up to meet them. With a final deep breath, he focused every ounce of skill he had left. He flared the aircraft's nose up at just the right moment, determined to set it down as gently as possible, despite the howling wind. This was it, the moment of truth. With a bone-rattling thump, the jet's wheels hit the runway. The plane bounced once in the crosswind, but then the tires caught firmly on the asphalt. Ethan immediately cut the throttles and slammed on the brakes with both feet. The 737 roared and shuddered as it rushed down the rain-slick runway, spraying water in its wake. After a few heart-stopping seconds, the aircraft's speed finally dropped and it rolled to a steady, safe pace. They were down. Against all odds, Ethan had done it. For a moment, the cabin was in stunned silence. Then an eruption of joy swept through the plane. Cheers and applause thundered from the passengers who had just moments before thought they were living their final moments. Some people laughed, others sobbed with relief. Ethan let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His eyes stung with tears of gratitude and sheer exhaustion. He had never felt a greater wave of relief in his life. "Tower, West Air 219, we're on the ground," Ethan murmured into his radio, barely believing the words himself. Emergency vehicles were already racing alongside the plane with lights flashing. Ethan guided the jet off the runway onto a taxiway and then set the parking brake. Only then did he truly allow himself to relax back into his seat. In the cockpit, Maria let out a broken laugh of triumph and threw her arms around his shoulders from behind. "You did it," she cried, her voice shaking. Ethan managed a tired smile as he gently corrected her. "No, we did it." Moments later, paramedics climbed aboard and hurried into the cockpit. They quickly lifted Captain Morgan onto a stretcher. One of the medics turned to Ethan, eyes wide with respect. "Getting him down so fast may have saved his life," he said. Ethan, still catching his breath, simply nodded. He watched as they rushed the unconscious captain off to a waiting ambulance, silently praying his mentor would pull through. Outside on the tarmac, passengers were beginning to disembark down the mobile stairs. Many paused to look into the cockpit or to reach out to Ethan as he emerged. "Thank you," one man said, gripping Ethan's hand firmly with tears in his eyes. An elderly woman who had eyed Ethan's prosthetic arm nervously at the start of the flight now approached him slowly. She pressed both trembling hands around his and whispered, "Thank you. You saved all of us." Ethan felt a swell of emotion in his chest as he nodded to her. Each word of gratitude from the people he had protected felt like a balm, healing wounds of doubt that had scarred him for years. When the last of the passengers was safe on the ground, Ethan finally descended the stairs himself. Maria stayed right beside him, a steadying hand at his back as his legs wobbled with exhaustion. The cool night air and drizzle felt incredible on his face. All around, red and blue lights flashed and reflected off puddles. Dozens of eyes, passengers, firefighters, medics, and base personnel turned toward Ethan. He had been the quiet co-pilot with one arm. Now he was something else entirely in their eyes. Through the crowd on the tarmac, one figure approached, Brigadier General Arthur Donovan, still in his Air Force uniform, rain beating on his brimmed hat, came to a stop in front of Ethan. The general removed his hat and tucked it under his arm. Then he drew himself to attention and gave Ethan a sharp, respectful salute. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He straightened up and returned the salute as best he could, his right hand trembling at his brow. Here he was, a civilian pilot standing in the rain, being saluted by a decorated Air Force general. It felt almost unreal. General Donovan's voice carried over the patter of rain. "Ethan Hayes," he said, "tonight you showed the world what real flying is." The older officer's eyes shone with pride. "Today, you proved that being a pilot isn't about how many arms you have. It's about heart, skill, and unshakable courage. I've never been prouder to salute someone in my life." Tears mingled with the raindrops on Ethan's face. "Thank you, sir," he managed quietly, lowering his hand. He accepted the firm handshake the general offered, feeling the genuine respect in that grip. Around them, the gathered crowd began to clap in acknowledgement of the extraordinary feat they had witnessed. At that moment, Ethan realized that the general's salute was the very one he had once feared he'd never earn. His journey had come full circle. He had lost an arm, but he had proven something to himself and the world. Courage isn't about having all your strength. It's about using what's left to do what's right. His story reminds us that no dream is ever truly lost, and that sometimes life's most turbulent storms lead us right to where we were always meant to be.